So we're going to start a new kit today. It's the ericasynths Polivoks VCF 2. So it's a voltage controlled filter. And we have some PDF guides that I downloaded, the assembly guide. There's not much in the way of direct instructions, it's just kind of giving you a heads up in what order to do things and also how to put the resistors in. They need to stand up because there's not much room on the PCB. Also downloaded the builder materials. So I've already been through this kit and checked off all of the components as I went through the kit. We have the kit, and inside we have PCB and the front panel. We also have ribbon cable and 2 bags of components. So in this bag we've got all the potentiometers and switch, and sockets as well. We'll use those later on. For now, so as mentioned, I've already been through these and double checked them against the build of materials. Let's pull out all the doubles, triples and more, so we can start with those. And start with the 100k and the 10k resistors. Let's solder those in. Do a bit of shaping with the legs. These need to stand up on the board as opposed to laying flat. Solder those in. Clean up the legs. So that's those resistors done. So now we move on to the next resistors. There's 6 of them, 10k. Solder those in. We're tidying them up. Next up we've got a 3k single resistor. So resistor 23. Next we've got one 39k. And that goes into R24. Next on the list we have 3 47k resistors. Let's solder those in. That's those done. Next we have 3 1K resistors. Next we have 2 110K resistors. Next we've got 4 56K. Solder them ones in. And clean that lot up. Right, next up we've got the R1, which is a 50K trim pot, which is this little device, and that's on R1, which is up here. That's the trim pot done. Right, next up we're going to do some diodes. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 diodes here. IN4148 diodes, and they go in VD 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, and the line is clearly indicated on the board. If you can see that, so the line on these diodes is the black line, and that corresponds to the line on the PCB. Right, let's solder those in. So next up we've got 2 1N4001 diodes. Solder them 2 on. Right, next up I'm going to put the ceramic capacitors in. We have 12 of these. There's actually only 11 needed. There's obviously 1 extra in there. So these are not polarized. Let's solder them in. Right, we clip all them legs down. Next up I'm going to put the 2 ferric beads in. Let's solder those in. Next we have VT1, which is described as 2-92-M. It's a 2N3904, and that goes into VT1. It goes with the flat edge pointing towards the top of the board, but you have to bend the pins a bit because the third one's, or the middle one, slightly back, and I think the side two will need bending as well. You're going to need to flatten them pins out slightly because they're too wide. Flatten them out a little bit. Be careful, we don't want to break these. It just brings them all in a bit closer. And then we want to do it with the flat side pointing up. That looks correct to me. Hopefully that will hold it in place. Because they're quite small solder points on this. Tiny, in fact. Next up we have two resettable fuses. Now it took me a little while to work out what these are because the markings don't correspond to the manual and even a Google search, but by process of elimination I ended up with these on the build list after I've checked all the components. These go into VR1 and VR2. Solder those on. Next up we have the electrolytic capacitors. One set is not actually polarized. So that's polarized, that's polarized. That one isn't polarized, which is unusual, I've never seen before. Next up we've got 2-52 and they are K140UD12s, which are these little things. I don't know what they are, but I do know that you have to get them in the right place, and there's a little notch on the top that tells you what direction it is that corresponds to the notch on the PCB. There's a lot of connectors on this, so it's going to be tricky to get this to go through the board. Got to work around one pin at a time, slowly get them all lined up. It doesn't say in the notes how to solder that. It just has an aerial kind of view of it, so you can't see how high from the PCB it actually sits. So I'm going to guess, put it roughly the same height as the resistors. Now we've also got another one of these over here. This one's orientated slightly differently. Again, just trying to line up all of these pins. Let's make sure orientation is correct with these, which they are. Let's solder these in. Right, and clean them ones out. Next up we've got the IC sockets. DA1 with the cut out that direction. What I normally do with these, hold them flat to the board and then just bend the end pins to hold them in place. And when you solder them, you bend them ones back when you get to them. Just use it to hold them in place. Next one is DA2, which is an 8-pin, and that faces the same way as the other one. Okay, hold that on the board, do what we did to the other one. Bend 2 pins diagonal to hold the whole thing. Then we can solder the other pins to hold it in place, and then we can bend them back. Now we can bend the pins that were holding it back. Be very delicate. Solder those ones in. Right, next up we have the power socket. Now this is a groove on one side or a cutout that goes towards the inside of the board. I've worked that out because at the top of the pins it's plus 12 volts and the bottom is minus 12 volts, which corresponds to a little diagram that I've got. So if you're looking at it that way around, on the diagram you can see that the bottom two pins are minus 12, which corresponds on here to minus 12 that end. There's the bit that slots into the groove, so it's that way around. It's good, a handy piece of visual reference for the power pins. Just to have a look via Google, eurorack ribbon cable power. We need to solder this in. We need to hold it in place while we're doing it, so we do this. Use a bit of tape. Let's solder this in. Next, we're starting to move into the final stage, which is all the switches. So, we switch the board over. We have audio inputs. Let's move on to the large pots now. There's one slightly different. There's an A100 and 4 B100s. The A100 goes into R11. Check with the faceplate, see how it's all lining up so far. That's all pretty much flush all the way around. With that all held in position, we can solder the next lot and the final soldering actually. So now I think we are pretty much done. There were some missing components, but they say NU, which is not used. So we now have all of them soldered in place. Let's put the chips in. Cutout goes towards the top of the board. That's those done. Put one nut on there as a spacer, because otherwise there's a gap for that switch. So put a spacer in that. And we are done, apart from putting the knobs on and the power connector gun. It's that way round. So minus 12 is at the the red stripe of the power connector, and that's minus 12. So we've got that round the right way. That's all good. Make sure all the components are all straight. As I bent it up a bit while I was putting it together. So we have the knobs to go on, and then we should test it. So to put these on, just twist it all the way to the left, put the knob on and put the marker right down to 0, tighten it on, and then it should go minimum maximum. Might just loosen it off from the panel a little bit so it doesn't rub. And the same for all the others, twist them to the left. That all works. That's everything on, all the nuts tightened up, and we are ready to test it. Going to use my previous module as a sound source. So we've got a very low square wave. Let's put the amp into the output, the filter, put the same square wave and put that into input, turn the input up, and we have filters working. Also got resonance. Yeah, that's definitely resonance. Try a sine wave. And we got a triangle wave. And what else have we got? Sawtooth. And also, let's check. Let's put square wave back in. Let's try use one of the CVs. Crazy sounds. And let's, while we're there, sub it into the CV2 and we'll listen to it. Really crazy. Mess around with the different sounds. The CV. So we've got band pass and low pass. Crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy.